My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverses, mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
The nihilistic microscope of death and everything's terrible. I didn't prepare that, obviously.
Mjolnir, I have finally decided to not acknowledge you as a guest when you come on anymore. I'm like, she's married to Beef Pork Ribs. She comes on often enough that let's just consider you another host. So I'm no longer going to acknowledge your presence. If you're here, you're just going to have to pipe in and speak for yourself and know that we're, of course, grateful to have you with us. I'll say it one more time. We're grateful to have Mjolnir with us today.
Hi, I am indeed here. I'm honored to not be worth mentioning, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's meant to be a compliment. I'm just I feel so fresh today. I actually was outside for like 2.5 hours. I actually was building a snow fort with a family that I know, and I got buried in snow, which to some people might sound very not fun, especially if you're claustrophobic. For me, I loved it, and I just feel awake. So I am on the ball today. How are you guys feeling?
We also went for a nice walk outside, which there was no snow fort being constructed, but there's not that much snow left up here, so it's pretty nice.
Everything's melting and super muddy and gross. It's sad.
But the walk was pretty good.
It was a lovely walk, but it tired me out. But everything tires me out right now.
That sounds fun? Question mark.
I mean, it's because I'm growing a baby inside me, so it's a good reason.
Fair enough. So last week we talked about movies that are supposed to be coming out in 2021, and already there have been some changes in release dates. So I think it'd be fun. Maybe it won't be fun. Maybe it'll be depressing. But we're gonna try a new thing on the show where every week we're gonna talk about movie releases that have changed. We're gonna call it Dooms Delays. So we have a couple Dooms Delays this week. Since again, it's kind of funny. It's literally been a week since we talked about movie release dates, but let me know before Gribs
saying that this was probably going to change.
Yeah. So some of these changes are, I think, fairly minimal, and some of them are kind of puzzling. For example, A Quiet Place Part 2, which was scheduled to come out in September, is now being released in May.
Interesting.
So actually, this isn't a delay. And then I think about it. What's the opposite of a delay?
A bump up.
A bump up. Do you guys think that's what does that say? That they don't care about the movie, or that they think things are going to be better?
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It could mean a couple things. It could also mean, because I haven't seen A Quiet Place yet. I really want to. It sounds really good. But from my understanding, it is it's post-apocalyptic and there's not a lot of people around and stuff, right? And they're hiding from CGI monsters. So, maybe it's something maybe they just got lucky that they filming didn't take as long and they were able to finish filming sooner because it's not as crowded of a set as it would normally be. They thought they'd take advantage of that.
I'm going to be super cynical here and say that they've done market research that prove that more high school students watch movies online when they are not at school, and that's why they're releasing it before school starts up again.
Well,
Is that a true thing?
I don't know, but it sounds
It
likely.
sounds
and
true.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't have to be exactly that explanation, but I think it's some kind of a marketing. It would actually make more sense for this to come out in May.
yeah, I think it's actually a Paramount Plus thing, because this is a
Mm.
Paramount Pictures movie, and Paramount Plus is launching in May. So I don't think they're doing the same thing that HBO Max and Warner Brothers are doing, where they're like doing the simultaneous release. But I think what I remember seeing is that Paramount movies will show up on Paramount Plus like 45 days after they're released in theaters. So if they move this release date up, that means that it'll be content for their service sooner.
Yeah, maybe they're trying to use it to bring. Maybe they saw how well Wonder Woman worked for bringing people to HBO Max, and they're trying to like bring people in that way by being like, "Here's a new release, like, for free and before you can see it in theaters."
But the difference is that, well, no, I guess Wonder Woman's release date was also pushed back, so it's kind of the same scheme. Yeah, that's the more likely.
It's like we've already kind of mixed out on the we've already kind of missed out on the initial time this was supposed to happen. So at this point, the best thing we could do with it is try to start our streaming service off good, because everyone's trying to start a streaming service now.
Which I learned just looking through the App Store. Apparently, Paramount Plus will be available in Canada, so that leaves me with the discernment of if it's worth getting or not. But Universal Pictures also made a couple changes this week. They moved the release date for Fast 9 or Fast and the Furious 9 from May this year till June, so it just was bumped ahead 1 month. But more interestingly, their sequel to the Minions was moved from July 2021 to July 2022. So it was delayed a whole year.
I think that one definitely is because they need their target demographics to be dragging their parents into theaters, and if they don't, it's not going to make any money. Nobody is going to willingly stream Minions and let that enter into their household. The only reason anybody ever watches that movie is because they're being coerced by children to go see it in theaters.
It's interesting you say that, because I think the only movies that are making money right now at the box office are like the Tom and Jerry movie and the Raya movie, where they are more family geared films.
Yeah, but there's family geared and aimed at toddlers without much discernment.
Minions is a different level of children's entertainment that is below average.
But not necessarily that it's strictly below average, but
it is though.
Well, but I think it's similar to kind of like the when they made the Angry Bird movie. It wasn't aimed at everybody who plays Angry Bird. It was aimed at very small children who can make people watch things with them. And I think the Minion that's the thing. It's not like the original movie, Despicable Me, was a family movie. It was aimed at the whole family. There were things for the parents, things for the kids.
And it's just a really solid movie.
Arguments can be made for and against that, but no, it was a good movie. But
my younger siblings were obsessed with that movie, so I've seen it like 15 times. And like there are much worse children's movies that you have to watch like 15 times. Like that movie, it did not get old. Like it didn't get near as old as it could have gotten. So like I think that's proof of its solidness.
Solidity.
So it's a quality film. Everything else in that franchise is not, but the first one actually had effort put into it.
That's those are the only ones, thankfully, and I hope we don't have to have Dooms delays every week. Like ideally, this would be something when they bring up every couple weeks.
I still think it's fun.
I hope Minions 2 gets the Gambit movie treatment and just keeps getting delayed and delayed until they eventually admit that it's never going to happen. Because we don't need Minions 2 in this world.
This is not really a news story. It's more so I just want to say that I've reached this point. I have signed up for a month of Crave so that I can get access to the Snyder Cut when it comes out on March 18th. So it has happened. I am being forced. I mean, I'm not being forced. I am choosing to do this, but as a fan, I feel forced to pay for another streaming service just so I can get access to one thing.
Yeah, that's the problem with the with all the movie studios and stuff realizing that there's money in streaming services and being like, actually, what if we just made our own instead of licensing out to Netflix?
But I think it's also the pandemic has a lot to do with that. Like they always knew there was money in streaming, but their business model still worked better with theatrical releases, but now it doesn't.
Well, joke's on them, because when we talk about it, I'll give you my password so you don't have to pay for it yourself.
Illegal. No.
All right, so we are here today to talk about The Boys, which is a series that is airing on Amazon Prime Video, but it started out as a comic book. And since it's the first time we've really talked in depth about the franchise, we should do a secret origin segment. So, how has everyone been introduced to the Boys franchise?
I knew nothing about it until the series. I'd heard. I think we started watching it together in season 2, right? Like when season 2 came out, right? Like I had heard some interesting things about season 1, but like not enough to check it out. And then things ramped up with season 2, and people were talking about it again. And I think
I watched the first season without you, and then we rewatched it together when season 2 came out.
Yeah, and because before Gribbs was watching it, and I was like, yeah, I'm interested, and I do like superhero stuff. It's kind of my main thing, so I checked it out and really liked it.
Yeah, I actually read, like, I was aware of its existence and its creation, and I knew it was based on a graphic novel. And when we were on the trip to Montreal, we were in a bookshop, and I found that bookshop had the first issue of The Boys, and I did not read it in its entirety, but I thumbed through it, and I knew who the actors in the series were going to be, and I was a little bit surprised by some of the casting choices as I was reading it, and figured it was an adaptation, but also I liked the concept behind it, and that general idea of what if superheroes weren't all good people, which I think and I guess we'll get more into it, but I thought was a very interesting concept, because they're still superheroes, but they're just not really.
But they're real people.
Yeah, but they're not just real people. They're also like.
And it's superheroes that have existed for long enough for corruption to take hold, just like in any industry.
Yeah, it's like where after superheroes have become systematized and privatized, even, which I thought was a great concept.
And I think I haven't read the comics, but from what I've understand and like some things I've heard from various YouTubers and podcasters and stuff, they do like the show builds on the comics and does its own thing kind of, and like goes more into detail about certain things and like changes some characters to make the point come across better and stuff in ways that are really good, and that prove that something doesn't have to be exactly like the original to still capture the spirit of the original, and like changes can make adaptations better.
Oh yeah, like I started, like, I looked up the comic storyline on Wikipedia to get a sense of how similar it was to the show, and in broad strokes it kind of does the same thing, but there's many details that are very different, and that's, I would agree with you, it's to the shows, it's a streamlining of the content, like it makes it less overwhelming for people.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like Umbrella Academy, and it's like a similar thing where it's like there are some of the things that they tone down because some things just work better in a comic book than asking someone to like actually like suspend their disbelief when they're seeing it on a screen, and just kind of a reworking of some characters and like moving some things around to just make it better and like
make it more focused.
Make it more focused and make it mainstream, but not in a bad way. Like make it
accessible.
Easier. Yeah, make it more accessible without losing the message, which is really important.
Yeah, I think I might have first heard about this through Wikipedia, actually, because I had this thing when I was in high school where I was like a Wikipedia person. I just like, before YouTube was a thing, I like clicked on the links to links within articles of Wikipedia. And I think going down a rabbit hole of like reading about superheroes, I eventually came across The Boys, and just reading was on the Wikipedia page, like, wow, this is very different from like conventional superhero stories. And that's where it ended, because I just didn't feel the need to like find the comics or learn more about it. And then of course, like as attentive as I am to the superhero movie news community, hearing the announcement that The Boys was being made and some of the actors are going to be in it, I was like, oh, okay, interesting. But when the show came out, I remember watching the first episode, and the first episode of The Boys really kind of sets the tone for what the show is going to be like. And at the time, I was like, I don't need to watch any more of this. And it wasn't until it got pulled out of the jar last week that I've seen more of the show. So I've now watched the entirety of the first season. I have not had a chance to watch the second because these episodes are really long, and
Yeah.
I only had so much time available to watch the show.
You still binge the first season in a week. That's pretty good.
Oh, you're gonna have to remind me where the first season ends, because we watched them all at once. So
Yeah, we're gonna try and talk about the
Yeah.
concept of the show without spoiling too much, and then we'll get towards spoilers later on.
yeah, I'll try not to go too spoilery. A lot of stuff happens.
Yeah.
When was the comics when were the comics originally released? Like, are
So-
they fairly old?
Well, it depends on how you define old. So the original comic book run of The Boys was from 2006 until 2012. For the first 6 issues, it was actually published by Milestone Media, which is a kind of a sideline offshoot of DC Comics.
Mm.
And interestingly enough, it was canceled after the first 6 issues because DC was not a fan of the anti-superhero tone the book was taking. And we'll talk more about this later, but there are some obvious allusions to DC characters in The Boys, so I can kind of see why they chose to cancel it. I think, and we'll talk about this, I think there could have been a way to actually like keep it going. But they kind of shopped, the creators owned the rights. That was the one of the things with Milestone Media, is that like unlike DC or Marvel, the people writing the comics kind of owned it, so they were allowed to shop the idea around to other companies. And so a comic book company called Dynamite Entertainment, which mostly does comics based on like public domain characters like Zorro and Tarzan and whatnot, picked it up and sort of allowed them to keep publishing it for the entirety of its run. So it went on for 72 issues that were published over a period of 6 years. And it's really important for people who are kind of coming into this franchise to understand who the writer of The Boys is, because he's kind of famous in the comic book world. Have you guys ever heard of Garth Ennis?
I recognize the name. But yeah, so I've definitely heard it in circles, I guess, but I don't have a specific origin to it.
Unless it's the author of Sandman, no.
No, that's Neil Gaiman.
That's, yeah.
But
So
I found a quote from Garth Ennis that kind of explains a lot of who he is and what The Boys is. So, Beeper, if I can get you to read this quote for us.
does he have an accent?
He's British.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I find most superhero stories completely meaningless, which is not to say I don't think there's potential for the genre. Alan Moore and Warren Ellis have both done interesting work with the notion of what it might be like to be and think beyond human. See Miracle Man, Watchmen, and Supergod. But so long as the industry is geared towards fulfilling audience demand, i.e. for the same brightly colored characters doing the same things forever, you're never going to see any real growth. The stories can't end, so they'll never mean anything.
Which is a legitimate criticism, but also there are ways to have character development and not run a character into the ground without doing like the stuff The Boys does. Like, there are ways you can have good stories that do let things end without getting really depressing and deconstruction-y about it.
Yeah, like there's a pessimism and a cynicism.
Yeah.
Reading about him, I guess he grew up reading British war comics, so he wasn't introduced to superheroes until he was a teenager, and at that point he thought it was a ridiculous, kind of stupid idea. And apparently the first comic book that based on a superhero he actually liked was The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, which of course was like a deconstruction of sorts of superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the guy who is the brainchild behind The Boys. He essentially has no love for superheroes, and so we're going to get into talking about The Boys. It is another chapter in the kind of ongoing deconstruction of the superhero genre.
And deconstructions are great, but the important thing to acknowledge is that they can't exist without the genre, like the genre as a whole, and and, and things being dark and gritty, or like if everything was like Watchmen or or like The Boys, I would hate my life. Like
Yeah,
that would be horrible
but
for everything to be like that. Like it's refreshing, and this, like, it is refreshing, and I'm wondering, like, does he have someone else he works with to do these? Because if he hates superheroes so much, in order to deconstruct things as well as he does, and like as well as the show does, you have to have the knowledge of these characters that you generally wouldn't have unless you had a love for them in some way.
Just before we get to that, though, like, it's important to remember deconstruction isn't always being cynical about something. It's to look at the, it's basically purposefully subverting expectations based on what people expect of the genre, because there are some, like The Boys, or in oh no, I can't remember the name of there is a very interesting anime that is about it's basically a deconstruction of the magical girl.
Madoka Magica.
Yeah, Madoka Magica. That one is very dark, but there are also things like, a lot of people talk about Hunter x Hunter being a deconstruction of the basic shonen type, and other than the final arc of the anime, most of it isn't super dark. It's just different and changes things, not just to subvert expectation, but to show that some of the stereotypes that exist in shonen manga, like the main character always winning and being so special that he can't lose, are
Stupid.
Just don't work in a real world. So I think definitely there is something to the grittier side of the deconstruction of comic books, like Western comic book heroes, because that is something they've been
They're so bright and shiny.
Well, they've been forced to be also bright and shiny, but it's also important to see that, like, The Boys, and I think the TV show does actually do a good job of this, is not everything is completely dark and gritty. If you look at the main team, and I guess we'll talk about them, but like, there's only really two of them that take the purely dark approach to it, and the other ones are just trying to change an imbalance of power, which is, I guess, a different kind of issue.
Yeah, so before we get any farther here, Beef Fork Ribs, why don't you give us the Blu-ray case description for The Boys?
It's suicide to go after the soups.
We can use help stuffing them.
Excuse me. I'm sorry, are you okay?
I'm fine. I'm just having a bad day. It's a work thing. I'm supposed to be this hero idol symbol, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
She could help us.
She's a soup, just like the rest of them.
You're wrong about her.
Just remember, who your friends, who your enemies are.
In a world strangely resembling DC because of the prominent superheroes are less than perfect. The government knows and are trying to take them down, but they can only do so with the help of the Boys, a ragtag team of people who have reason to hate superheroes and are trying to tear down their image for revenge and slightly the benefit of society.
Now, Mjolnir, you already mentioned the Umbrella Academy. There's a kind of actually a few different kind of connections between The Boys and the Umbrella Academy. For one, they're both comic book adaptations that are based on like creator-owned content. Two, they're both in a way deconstructions of superheroes. The Boys being more so like kind of a commentary on like the Justice League rather than X-Men. And then three, they're also both shows that film in Toronto.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of funny. And Titans also films in Toronto. So Toronto has become a hotbed for superhero media because Shazam was filmed there as well. Maybe there's a hope for us one day to, well, actually you don't live in Toronto or near Toronto anymore, but maybe there's a hope I can be an extra one day if I actually drive down there and just happen to come across the set. Would you guys say it's fair to say that Watchmen was kind of like the first real deconstruction of the superhero genre that kind of set the groundwork for things like The Boys?
Most well known for sure.
Yeah.
Like most mainstream.
Like there are a few other things that have happened, but definitely as far as something, well, not just something that it was mainstream, but something that was licensed and that was, you know, not done independently. Because I know of a few other like web comics that did something like that, and although I suppose the Watchmen is pretty
probably came into existence after Watchmen did.
Well, not after the movie, but after the comic did. Yeah. But again, the comic didn't gain that much notoriety until after the movie. So
well, I don't know about that. It was already like #1 comic book of all time according to Time magazine before the movie came along.
Really? Did not know that. Interesting.
Yeah, like if you remember the teaser trailers for Watchmen, they like said based on the most acclaimed graphic novel of all time.
Interesting. Which is, once again, I think some of that is people being like, look, I'm so smart because I like this smart comic book about how comic books are stupid. But then, and there is, which like there is merit to this kind of media, and I do appreciate it, and I really liked The Boys. And Watchmen it's not my thing personally, but I can acknowledge it is very good and well written and stuff like that. But I feel like that's kind of the fact that there's enough in there that people who like superhero stuff would read it, but then also people who don't like superhero stuff would read it because they want to like throw shade at superhero stuff. Like, it does make sense why it would do very well because it is a bigger audience than normally you would have, because not a lot of things have that crossover.
Yeah, I bring up Watchmen because Watchmen is a comic book that was turned into a movie and then HBO series that is it asks the questions like, what if ordinary people in their woundedness and brokenness just decided to like dress up in like superhero costumes and start fighting crime? And the different characters you meet have different kind of backstories and like kind of, like I said, their own kind of wounds that sort of inform who they are as characters, and it shows how messed up they are.
Different motivations too. Like some of them have very different motivations for what they're doing.
Exactly.
Even though they're ostensibly doing good.
Yeah, and there's really only like one character in that actually has superpowers, and then it's like, well, what if a person did have this kind of power? Like, what would it do to their mental state?
Mm-hmm.
The Boys, by contrast, is more like a deconstruction. It's like, well, if the possibility for superpowers was real and people could become a superhero, what would that look like?
And also, like, we as humans who are so good at creating imbalances of power over really tiny little things that don't matter. Like, how would we react to people who legitimately, just by existing, create an actual literal imbalance of power that is impossible to overcome?
Yeah, I think
because like that's huge. Like we already do that.
I think if there's one, I might be getting ahead of us a little bit, but if there is one like maybe minor criticism of The Boys, is that it is, and there's good in-universe reasons for this, but it is just in America, which limits it a little bit, but also makes it a slightly more pointed criticism of the American economical and social and political structure. But it's still, yeah, it's a different, and I think, you know, we did talk about DC. There's similarities in the heroes, but also in the type of organizations and whether, because I mean, Marvel has hit this too, but I feel like DC has a lot more of the involvement of the government relative to the superheroes, especially with the Justice League, with X-Force, with different measures and countermeasures that aren't necessarily there except in X-Men and Marvel. Or like they're in Marvel, they're just less prominent except in X-Men.
Yeah, so this brings me back to my question about DC, because there are characters in this that are clear stand-ins for Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman. So, do you guys think the boys would have been more successful, or would be more, I guess, poignant, if that's the right word, if they had kind of just made it a full-on like kind of Injustice style variation, like a Elseworlds DC universe story?
I don't think it needs to be a one-to-one for the criticisms and jokes to work. Like, people clearly understand. Like, people get it. Like, they're very obviously off-brand versions of DC characters, and that, like, a lot of the stuff they do is already pretty heavy-handed. Like, I don't know if it would work as well if it was straight up like a dude in like the like original Superman like leotard doing the same things.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that I understand where you're going with that, and I think it might broaden some of its appeal, but it would keep it from exploring some of the things that they have explored. If, like, because especially if you take, for example, Homelander is somewhat of a Superman stand in, but where he comes from and the fact that he is also kind of a Captain America stand in some ways too, um, adds a lot to what his character is and what they do with it, which could not be there if he was an alien, right? Like, um, which Superman is, and which I think the Justice League, and I think that's another thing about why it shouldn't be, is that despite the fact that in DC Comics and in the Justice League, which is pretty directly what's being, the original Justice League is pretty directly what's being looked at. Most of them, well, all of them, except for Batman, have their powers from an external, non-human source, right? I mean, the Speed Force is discovered by humans, but it really isn't really in their control. Whereas in The Boys, it is a lot more about people like superheroes existing in the world, more akin to My Hero Academia kind of universe, where it is like there are people who are superheroes, or Sky High had the same kind of concept.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are superheroes, some people aren't, and that's how we're building up our society.
Yeah. You mentioned how our microscope today is very nihilistic. And that's a word I hear a lot, and I like will use it in conversation as if I know what it means. But maybe beef pork ribs, if there's others like me who are listening, it's like, oh yeah, I totally know what that word means. Could you just, give a brief kind of describer of what nihilism is?
Existence is pointless.
Sorry.
But no, that's the simple part of it, is that existence is pointless. Not in the sense of like, oh, I'm depressed, I don't want to do things, but in the sense that there is no greater purpose to existence. There's no greater meaning to life.
There's no greater good that, like,
well, no,
it'll all work out.
The greater good is a concept that you can still have in nihilism as long as you are defining it in a certain way. But it's a lot more to do with a kind of cosmic existence that justifies things. That doesn't exist. It is primarily, though not exclusively, an intellectual reply to the Christian worldview that God exists, God has a plan, and God directs the world. It's much more the world is what you make of it, and there is no higher purpose or higher power that benevolent or otherwise, that is making things work. So when we talk about, I feel like even for the boys is less nihilistic than Watchmen or something like Rick and Morty. But even Rick and Morty, it's really just Rick who is the nihilist, and other people are kind of forced into his point of view because he is smarter and better. But it doesn't strictly define the universe, and I think there's somewhat of that in the boys as well. Although, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit, the boys does do a very direct contradiction between its point of view and Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is something about the fact that the Christianity does exist in the boys that does pertain to the fact that it isn't necessarily 100% nihilistic, in the sense that there's still the possibility for a higher power or a higher purpose. It's just most of the main characters don't believe in it. And again, like Rick and Morty, where it's, Rick is the one who kind of imposes his point of view on people. Butcher, sorry, kind of imposes his point of view on the comic as being, and on the show as being the main voice, and also the main voice of reason, unfortunately. I'm putting reason in big air quotes there, but it's his point of view that is seen, and he definitely has a very nihilistic point of view about the world.
For a good reason. But also, it's nice that the show clearly establishes he is a very flawed person who makes a lot of mistakes. So it doesn't, so his point of view doesn't have to be the end all and be all, and you don't have to be like, oh, the only way you can read The Boys is through Butcher's point of view. Whereas like something like Rick and Morty, it is like Rick is proven right time and time again, and I kind of stopped watching. Like, it's a really clever creative show that I was enjoying, and I kind of stopped watching it because it got so
Pandering.
overwhelming. It got so overwhelming with that constant message, and everything about the show is reinforcing that Rick's right, that people are horrible and the universe is horrible and nothing means anything, and it's just really, it's just too much after a while. And they're like, at least you do see other points of views in The Boys, and they're not given quite the same weight, but they're given enough that
I
that
think
it's not completely
I think the
hopeless.
show is more positive, less, because again, reading what I read about the comic book, it sounds like there's more nihilism or more like pessimism, cynicism. Because you're right, the show at least does present you a couple different points of view, and it shows you like, yeah, not all these people are the worst. Some definitely are, and their perspective is seen that way. But this is certainly not my cup of tea.
Sorry, even just like the Billy Joel song that keeps playing over and over again is fundamentally a hopeful song, and it does kind of represent a point of view that can still apply to that universe.
Yeah, and frankly, this is the kind of thing I just don't enjoy. Like, I don't have a nihilistic worldview. I don't see the world that way. Yes, people are flawed, but I think just going back to like Garth Ennis's quote and just reading what the stories he decides to tell, it's like it feels like he's just coming across like, oh, I want to be edgy and I want to like do all the things that people think about but nobody actually does. And you see that the way some of the superheroes are represented is like how they use their abilities. Like, yeah, if I had super strength or heat vision, could I in theory like cut someone in half with that heat vision? And he's not afraid to like portray that in his story, and to the show's credit, they're like faithful to that, because you get to see some stuff you certainly would not see in like a Superman story.
Yeah, but I find that the show didn't do it as heavy-handedly as it could have too, and it does have a certain amount of restraint, which I think is possibly why I think it's how you were able to get through it, but also
Yeah.
I think it's also what makes it a more compelling story.
Yeah, because you are seeing different points of views and you do have hope, and it still does that thing where like it seems to, like, the end of season 2 was a little frustrating to me because it ended with hope, and then suddenly it was like, nope, never mind, actually more stuff's going down, and then just started a whole new thing, and I was like, could we not enjoy our victory for like 20 seconds? Like, can we just enjoy this for a minute? And
It had to set up season 3.
yeah, but overall the show didn't do that. It did give you time to breathe and have hope and stuff, which, yeah, like you said, I think that really helps people be able to stick with it and handle it. And actually, one thing I did like, because a lot of things nowadays do just kind of like ignore Christianity, and so like I liked some of the stuff they did with Christianity and like some struggles people had with that, and even that one of the main characters was raised very aggressively Christian, and like that's even like how she learned to be a superhero was like at Christian conventions and stuff, and that was something she believed, and it was nice. Is it the second season? In the first season,
The
it's
Christian
nice.
festival thing.
Yeah,
The Christian
and
festival was in the
it's-
first season.
yeah, okay, and it's and like it's a little aggressive, but like everything in this world is heightened. As a Catholic person, I wasn't like offended or attacked at at this existing, especially because like people, extreme versions of people of every religion and like opinion do exist, and they're trying to make a point. And to me, I did appreciate the point seemed to be, or like could be read as more that like it is about like this corruption, that things getting corrupted and people being hypocrites, and that's what wears down the main character about her faith. And like it's not the faith itself, it's coming back and realizing things that she believed in aren't things that other people believe in, and that realizing some of the faults with that and things like that. That was like, it's like, yeah, there were legitimate criticisms there. That wasn't just like, oh, religion is evil and stupid and anyone who believes in it is like an idiot or the devil. There are specific people manipulating religion to get what they wanted, and that was kind of the point.
Yeah, I don't know. The way when I was watching that episode, I was like, wow, whoever wrote this has like a very immature, uninformed understanding of what Christianity is. And
Can I maybe a little moderate that just a tiny bit by remembering that what is portrayed in that movie is very, in that episode, sorry, is a heightened version of more fringe evangelical culture, which does exist, but which I also feel, this is why I have almost absolutely no problem with it, is that I do actually think that if given the existence of superheroes and only superheroes in America, those movements that do exist in America and that are a little bit more fringe would probably take off a lot more. And I think I personally thought it was a good world building because it is a logical kind of continuation of what some things that do exist might be if suddenly you had somebody like Homelander at the forefront saying God bless America, then the way he says God bless America would be very different from the way we say it now.
Yeah, and it's having, like I said, having people who are objectively special and better than other people, like, and like above them in certain aspects, would give a lot of people who have bad ideologies about things a really big thing to grasp onto as proof of those ideologies.
And spoiler for you, Average Joe, the second season is going to play a lot on that.
There's more of it.
Well, I guess my only real issue with
not
it
the
is
Christianity thing, the objectively better people.
Oh, okay. Well, my problem is that like I'm afraid that people will watch that and just think that is what Christianity is, and that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And that's again my perception of Garth Ennis as a writer is that there's like an immaturity there. He's like, he doesn't get it, so he's just kind of like, he's just taking whatever idea he has about the thing and then does something with it. So it's like, oh, I didn't read the Flash comic, so it's like, he wants to run fast, so I'm going to write this speedster character so that he's trying to be faster, or you know what I mean? Like it's I guess it's not that important, but just to say it, I agree with what you guys have said. That's sort of my concern when it comes to that.
No, and I think it's a legitimate concern, and it is something that and I think, to be fair, I do have a very good grasp on my faith and understanding what it is and how it plays out,
and how it's not that.
Yeah, exactly, and that is. But I think that's partially what's allowing me to look at it and say, well, and maybe I am giving the showrunners too much credit to say, no, they looked at the way Christianity exists, especially in the United States, and decided, well, if there were real superheroes who proclaim themselves to be aligned with this Christian message, then yeah, it makes sense that this would evolve into a very key component of the way they evangelize.
Yeah, but like I don't know, they're like I think it's teetering on the edge of straw man, which and I know as Christians, I think there's a hypersensitivity to that because we get a lot of straw man rhetoric thrown at us and as an easy target, and that is frustrating, especially when it's like, oh, you're stupid for these reasons, and it's like that's literally like not even close to what most people believe, and yeah, I understand that is frustrating. I think they did enough in the show that it wasn't that, and it wasn't that level of and even having one of the main characters have grown up in that culture and believe in that stuff and then lose her faith because she's let down by the people who taught her certain things. It is a very real story, and it is a very real issue, and it did feel very real. And like, but seeing this woman who did, and like seeing that she was a good person and she did have ideals, and a lot of those ideals did come from her faith and stuff. Like, I thought that helped with like humanizing it and making it not be just look at all these crazy people over there, because one of the main characters did grow up in this culture and did fully believe it, and then she comes back and there are things that stick out to her that she's like, oh, I never realized some of the exclusionary things here, or the expectation you have to be perfect and this and that she starts questioning. And I know I personally related with that a lot. I've had a lot of those issues and like thoughts and stuff as someone who like gets raised in a very traditional conservative way and then goes into the world and then has to figure out your own way to like have those things meet up and like mesh in a way that feels right to you. And a lot of people do just give up and be like, well, I guess because people aren't perfect and weren't living up to those ideals that I was taught, I'll just give up on the whole thing, which I think is sad.
Yeah, you brought up My Hero Academia earlier, Beeper, and I think it's probably like if you were to like have a spectrum of like perspectives of superheroes, it's like you would have My Hero Academia on the one end where superheroes exist and it's like a full-time job you can have, and there is like the celebrity culture around superheroes, except the majority of the characters are portrayed with like that sense of altruism and that sense of wanting to do good and be virtuous and be heroic. And then you have the boys on the other end where there is a superhero celebrity culture and it is a full-time job, and they're employees of like specific companies, and their actions are entirely motivated by self-interest and advancing their own publicity and fame. And then you have something like there's an anime called Tiger and Bunny, which is I would say somewhere in the middle, which is also a world about superheroes, and it's also one where it can be a full-time job, and you work with companies, and like I know some of them even have like branding, like sponsors on their costumes, and there's like a mix there where like there's some characters in that world that are kind of obsessed with the celebrity culture and are self-interested, but then you have some who are also just like kind of like traditional, wanting to do the right thing superheroes.
Yeah, I think there's two things to what you just said, but one of them might go into spoilers, so I won't get to that right away. The other one is, though, I feel like a better middle ground would be One Punch Man. Because somewhat, but the thing is, there is something that My Hero Academia and One Punch Man have that The Boys doesn't, and that is supervillains. And there's this The Boys kind of does but kind of doesn't, and there's a good reason for that in universe, but a lot of, I feel, the difference do come from that, right? From why some people are heroes, and why in The Boys pretty much nobody who is a hero decides to become a villain, partially because economically it makes more sense to be a hero and just live a hedonistic lifestyle on the side, but also if you like, I don't want to get into spoilers, but like there are reasons why those universes do happen very differently.
I think is it partly that like great power comes great responsibility thing where like, and in a lot of superhero things it is like some superheroes do what they do, like are altruistic and stuff, but like, you know, like the Spider-Man thing, he would rather not be Spider-Man, but he feels like he has to be, that kind of thing where like when supervillains are a regular thing, normal, like literally no one else can deal with that except for superheroes. So some people have to step up and maybe have even experienced that thing where they didn't step up and someone they love got hurt and they know that if they don't do this, no one else will.
Yeah.
Whereas in the boys universe, that's not the reason. They take on mostly petty criminal, like most of those heroes, like they're, until a certain point, they're never really in danger because they are super powered humans who are so far above the level of crime they're dealing with that of course they're going to win that, and like of course it would be worth it for a city to hire like a local superhero and stuff because they can handle just way more than anyone else can. But they could still handle it without them. It's just easier to get them to handle it.
Yeah, and that's like in My Hero Academia, some people use their quirk to become supervillains. In One Punch Man, there are monsters, but like there are an opposite to the superheroes that give a kind of moral responsibility to superheroes to use their superpower for good that doesn't exist in the boys.
Yeah.
All right, let's dip into the spoilerverse, and hopefully what we've said here kind of gives you a sense of if you would enjoy The Boys or not as an Amazon show. It's got 2 seasons so far. A third has been announced. I think it's coming out later this year. So there'll be a time code in the description where you can skip around our time in the spoilerverse to hear our final thoughts. Here we go. Maybe there's 2 seasons of television, so maybe we can each pick like one spoilery kind of character piece or plot point you'd want to discuss, because we could obviously be here forever if we talked about everything.
I'll go first. The fact that the superheroes are created, and specifically created by the company that runs them, that's the thing I was alluding to when I was talking about the big difference with My Hero Academia is that, superheroes are created by a company, and they technically know everybody who potentially has superpowers in the world and are attempting to control it, which I think is really amazing for storytelling. It's really a very good opportunity for some social criticism, especially of big companies in America, that it does absolutely. It was a good way to get Giancarlo Esposito to play a semi-villain in the show, but also
semi-villain? He's a villain. He's a bad dude.
I feel bad for that guy. Like he's going to try and play a nice guy at some point, and no one's going to believe it.
Yeah, but no, I know. But that's the thing that I think is really interesting is that, and also the way they kind of discover it little by little, and how the world reacts and how the company reacts, I thought added a lot of depth to the show.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't it make the world feel very small, though? It's like, like all the superheroes come from this one place in this one country.
But it made sense. I mean, the way this world runs, it would have been weird. It would have been really weird and cryptic if all the superheroes were only in America, if it wasn't for this reveal, it is.
And like, once again,
the way the world is built around that concept, which makes it work, I think.
Yeah, and it was also, again, the thing that made the fundamental Christian movement very American and aggressively patriotic was, look at this. We're the only country blessed by God with superheroes.
Right. Can you guys tell me like what happens to Huey and Starlight in season 2? Because they were like what kept me, like the show is a very it's not exactly my cup of tea, but I really appreciated how like those 2 characters were kind of there in the thick of like all of the kind of moral ambiguity that their people around them were experiencing. And at least the way season 1 ends, it seems like they are kind of like discovering a different path than the people around them.
They are. I think they're definitely both the heart of the show, and I appreciated them immensely. And that's what, like, and I identify with Starlight like so much. Just a lot of her issues, and oh, she was such a good girl. And she becomes a little less of a good girl in season 2, but like for good reasons.
Yeah.
Like I think she and Huey both have to
bend but not break. Although
yeah.
Huey kind of does a little bit at some point, but
They both have to lower their expectations or bend their morals a bit more in season 2. But I don't think they don't lose themselves though, at least not
no.
yet.
And
like,
they do like, and as far as like the relationship, they do actually keep working on like
it's a little up and down.
it's a little up and down, but also they have been lying to each other a little bit, and that. But I think it was good writing because there were natural consequences on the relationship to what both of them had been doing independently of one another and together as well.
By the end, I'm trying to remember. By the end, are they together again?
They're together again by the end of the
they get
second
through
season.
stuff by the end, and Starlight and Butcher have this really kind of nice talk about how Huey is the best thing in both their lives and is their soul. And because Starlight she had faith, and that was a big part of her moral compass, and finding out that she's a science experiment, not a gift from God, and things like that, and finding out all this horrible stuff in the people she's idolized makes her lose that. And I think, so it's interesting to see her like kind of acknowledging that this one good boy in her life is kind of taken that place of that moral compass for her, and that he does make her better and helps remind her why it's worth being better and why she doesn't just give in like Queen Maeve has for so long and stuff like that. And Butcher kind of acknowledges that too, that Huey is his conscience and helps him be slightly better.
I mean, he admits it. Mother's Milk makes him admit it, but he gets there eventually. Also,
and Huey does chew Butcher out for being the nihilistic, like,
jerk,
horrible person he is.
I will also say one good thing about season 2, which isn't really spoilers, but you do get to know specifically why Mother's Milk is involved, and I really liked his motivation.
Mm-hmm.
It was like you get Frenchie's too, and that one was not nearly as good, but like we're in the spoiler verse. Basically, Mother's Milk's dad was a lawyer who was a big advocate against the movement of superhero when it first started, and he ended up getting taken out by Vought, and that's why Mother's Milk keeps fighting, because his dad fought the good fight the right way and it didn't work, and he's trying to make his memory live on, which was a really but also again was a not fully revenge fueled. Like it was, he was seeking revenge for his father, but he was seeking it in a way like
in
that's
a
why
constructive way, exactly. Which is so nice to see.
Which is why, like, when again spoilers, but when Starlight and Huey managed to expose Vought, he's much happier, whereas Butcher just doesn't care because he wants all heroes to be dead.
Butcher is so racist against superheroes. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, like, that was something I noticed. It's like, why are you like, and that's the thing, like if it would be one thing if like all of the characters in like the 7 had the same kind of perspective that Homelander does, but they don't. Like he's definitely the worst, and I think the rest of them it's like it's all circumstantial, but he makes it seem like they're all like these like demons.
Yeah. It's actually the Deep gets a really interesting redemption arc in the second season.
I mean, redemption-ish, but like
realistic redemption.
Yeah. But it is still, I mean, it's one of those it's one of those things where part of it is purely selfish, that he wants back on top and this and that. But also there is a level of, he has a lot of self-hatred, and there is like a, I think it's, I love the Deep. Like, I don't love things he's done, obviously, but they did really interesting human things with that character that I really appreciated. And especially as a woman, Manny do pull the kind of stuff he did to Starlight, automatically canceled. Very, like, personally attacking for me. And so the fact that they managed to explore him as a person enough where you see why he was hurting people around him, and a lot of it comes from, it's not inherently malicious, it's self-hatred that he's internalized so much that he spews it on other people, and he hates his body so much because he's a weird a weird, like, sea man,
Freaky fish guy.
and and Homelander's horrible about it too. Like, other people he just clearly has a lot of trauma from people judging him for his body, which has made him hate his body, which means that he wants to feel power over women by having power over their bodies, which is horrible. And he does, the reason he goes through this self-discovery is not great, and
the methods of self-discovery are not great.
He falls into a cult that clearly has some shifty motives, but they do help him discover this stuff about himself, and he does seem to realize that it's wrong. Like, some of the public apology stuff, and he's still doing for show and is a selfish person, but, like, I did appreciate that kind of thing where, like, people who do monstrous stuff are not inherently monsters. And that's part of what I like about the show, and why, in a way, I think it is kind of a hopeful show, like, more than it could be, for sure, because it's not just everyone's evil, and it's not everyone's a bad person. Everyone has reasons for the way they are, and they are exploring them, which are really interesting, and it's nice to see. And even you get to see that people who seem good aren't always good, and the people who seem bad, they have their reasons, and they've been hurt, and I really liked it.
And one last thing, Homelander's muscles look so fake. Like, that costume, I'm sorry, I could easily tell that those were fake muscles.
But he never takes off the costume, so you can never verify it. I actually do appreciate that detail a lot, too, that Homelander is never not in his costume. Like, a few of the 7 are rarely out of costume, but the only 2 that never, ever take it off are Homelander and Dark Noir.
Batman.
Sure.
Coming around to final thoughts, The Boys is definitely a show that is interesting and has some interesting ideas. It's not a show for kids. There is a ton of swearing. I would say to the point of it being like, it almost like it's unnecessary, the amount of swearing there is.
Was the only one who swore that much, it would be okay.
Yeah, like, I think it plays into the satire. It's like, well, we're already getting an R rating, so let's just go, like, have every character swear as much as possible. But The Boys helps me appreciate more traditional superhero media, because it presents this kind of alternatives. Like, well, if Superman wasn't as virtuous and kind and a good person, this is what he would most likely be like. So I'm thankful for The Boys in that sense. It helps me appreciate the other superheroes that exist in other forms of media. And it does kind of present an interesting kind of perspective. I've been only seeing the first season. Admittedly, the way the first season ends and what I've heard of the second season makes me interested in watching it, but it's it's going to fall pretty low on my to-do list until we end up talking about it again.
Maybe when season 3 comes out, you'll watch season 2.
You'll always be one season behind.
Yeah. I think for myself, I remember something you wrote on our notes for the episode that we didn't directly say, but you wrote down, the show is very compelling. And I think that is a very good assessment of it. Like, there haven't been many shows recently that I've watched that I've wanted to watch episode after episode. I think The Boys and The Mandalorian are the only two that have really grabbed me that way. I know for Mjolnir there was also WandaVision, but like for myself, The Boys and The Boys and The Mandalorian definitely had that effect way more than anything else I've seen in years. And so it is a compelling show. It's not for everybody. You need to go into it knowing what it is. But I also think that as much as you talked about, Garth Ennis being a little bit immature in some ways, I do think that this show has put a lot of effort into internal coherence, which I really appreciate out of it.
I also think we talked about some of the DC stuff, but something that's interesting and I feel like important to acknowledge is that a lot of that stuff is surface level, and there is way more to this show than a DC parody, and I appreciate that about it. And like there's a lot of jokes and references that are kind of fun and like, oh, because it's like the thing, but like, like Queen Maeve, she's nothing like Wonder Woman. Her backstory is nothing like Wonder Woman. She just happens to kind of look like Wonder Woman, and because she was the one lady, she got that kind of reputation of having to have it on her shoulders of being the one lady and stuff, like things like that, where it's like they take broad strokes and vague ideas and they explore them in really interesting ways. And they explore them in really interesting ways, and they make unique new characters. And like Homelander he has Superman power levels. Like that's it. Like, and his upbringing is completely different. The way he dealt with his upbringing is completely different. There's so much going on that I don't know. I think it's a disservice to just focus on the DC stuff, personally, just because there's a lot of fun references there, but there's so much more to these characters than being ripoffs, and I appreciate that.
So I don't know. Should we give back cookies based on what we've seen? I've only seen the first season, so
I think so. I think the general consensus is that the second season is better, but not like I don't think by significant amounts. So I think it would still be a fair level.
All right. Well then, I guess it's like a 3 out of 4 back cookies. I'm sure there's a case to be made to make it better, but for me, it's like there's enough that feels juvenile that kind of prevents me from giving it a higher grade.
I'll actually give it a 3.5. 3.3 if you get, well, no, I'll give it it's a 3.5, I think, overall from my appreciation, but I can see it dropping to a 2.7 if you get insulted easily.
You gotta have a thick skin and a sense of humor, for sure. Yeah, like I'd say 3.5 probably. Like it's not, maybe a little high, not quite a 4, maybe a little higher than 3.5, because the fact that it isn't my type of some of the stuff they do, like it isn't my type of thing, but it is so well written and the characters are so real and human and compelling that I think it will grab a lot more people than the same concept done worse like would. It's more balanced than it should be. It's more balanced than a lot of these types of shows are, and I appreciate that, and that does elevate it.
You also have a huge bias for good character writing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge character person. Like, any movie that's like completely character driven, I'm like, yeah, that's my stuff. I love that. So I really like how much they dig into the characters, and if you really enjoy that, I think it will make the show totally worth it for you.
So The Boys is available on Amazon Prime Video, so if you do have that streaming service, go and watch it.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
Normally we'd go into the Bat Jar and look at our mail, but there is none, so we'll just go straight into potentially pulling some in the jar. Beef Pork Ribs, you kind of had the choice last. Well, you can decide. Are we going to do Rhea next week, or should we do another jar topic?
I'm still good for doing Rhea next week.
Okay.
Well, I want to watch it. It looks interesting.
Yeah, so
We'll
there you
watch
go.
it together.
We'll watch it. So we'll do Rhea next
that
week.
dragon thing is so pretty. Like, she's super hot. I'm interested to see if she has personality to go with it.
Well, she's voiced by Aquafina, so I've heard some critics say like, oh, it's like Genie level charisma, so we'll see. And we will see next week. Transition. So come back to the Bad Sharp podcast next week. We talk about Rhea and the Last Dragon. It is in theaters with some theater companies. In Canada, Cineplex is not showing it, so I have to go to a Landmark if I want to see it. But also, if you have Disney Plus, you can pay for the premium access thing. And until then, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
I'm Mjolnir.
Catch you on the flip side.